A very anxious and hesitant young man who identified himself as Justin called the counseling center and scheduled an intake session, and eventually made his way in for the appointment after he canceled a couple of times, seemingly out of anxiety. After breaking the ice and starting to tell his story, Justin described a slow descent into social isolation at his parents' farmhouse and pretty much avoided all outside contact and travel except for his third shift job at a local factory. He worked largely by himself with the exception of a few coworkers he had known for years. Despite looking fairly normal for his age and peer group, and seemingly having an average level of social skills, nothing really stood out much to the therapist about his presentation. He stated that he dreaded going to the local Walmart specifically and wasn't much interested in going anywhere that there were people. This had become so much of a concern and a habit that even his relationship with his girlfriend had become affected, to the point where they only spent time together isolated in her small apartment or at his house in the family room or his bedroom. The only break in his routine was an occasional late-night walk or ordering takeout food to be picked up, by her of course, or delivered to either of where they lived. Justin's predominant struggle was his core belief and recurrent thought that people are probably looking at me and thinking something negative about me. This thought, which he accepted at face value, caused him to feel a sense of awkward shame, or to feel an occasional emerging defensive hostility at what he perceived was a hostile rejection. In any event, because of what he said to himself, Justin had developed self-esteem problems and depressive symptoms as well. We have all been in this exact place in our lives at one time, no doubt. Everyone can remember a time earlier in their lives where they were so absolutely consumed with concern and anxiety about how others were seeing us. So Justin is someone we should have great empathy for, as probably each and every one of you that has made it this far through the book has felt the exact same way, if not at the same time in your life. In this case, the issue that I would have right off with the bat with Justin's life story is the timing and circumstances. I can remember being absolutely consumed with anxiety at one point in my life on a daily basis with how people looked at the way I dressed, talked, or handled social situations. My guess is you'll probably remember 7th grade the same way yourself. In my opinion, the question that is at the center of understanding the problem without saying to yourself, everybody is looking at me and thinking negative things, is really just how much attention do people pay us during the casual, fleeting interactions out in public. I'm not trying to deliberately be snarky by dropping the 7th grade comment. It's just that in normal time in our lives, when people are around us actually are watching our every move and putting... It's just that this is the normal time in our lives when people around us are watching our... It's just that this is the normal time in our lives when people around us actually are watching our every move and putting each other under the microscope. The middle school years are when kids generally hit puberty and boys start paying intense attention to girls and thus start the process of establishing an intense pecking order to rank who is where on the list. Likewise, at the same time, the girls are going through the exact same thing as detailed perfectly in the Lindsay Lohan movie Mean Girls. An intense attention is paid to hygiene, designer clothing, appropriate social behaviors, and people feel like they're in a fishbowl. This time of scrutiny happens to both sides of the fence and is usually where bullying is and criticism of your peers hits its peak. Sometimes the issue is that this period of life is so traumatic and painful for people that they live the rest of their lives believing that they are under the same watchful and intensive negative eyes that they were at public school number 73. I recently had a client who was in her early 30s and had admitted that she had never gotten over being the new kid in her class and having been judged as a threat by the other girls. She was given never-ending criticisms for every little thing that she did or said, out of the other girls' jealousy that she might take one of their spots in the pecking order. It affected her strongly enough that she did not trust others, despite being a very attractive, educated woman with a nice personality. The average person would look at her and generally see the good qualities in her, but she assumed the scrutiny had still continued. The question then is whether the social video camera is turned off for all of us from those days, or if nothing has really changed. If nothing has really changed, then Justin is right on target. And so are you, if you believe people are really watching you to see what kind of pants you wore today, or whether you're wearing the coolest tennis shoes, or how your hair looks, or whether you have a pimple on your chin. If things have changed, and the camera is not nearly so sensitive to details, then his response is a gross overreaction, and he has endured a bunch of social anxiety for nothing. As we discussed earlier in this chapter, the reason that we have all paid extensive scrutiny to one another at an earlier time in life was due to a unique, one-time need to establish a pecking order, when the boys discovered the girls and vice versa. I'm questioning whether there has been, or ever will be, again, a time in life where everyone in your social world is desperately and passionately competitive with one another, enough to spend time with one another, enough to spend the energy to put each other under CIA levels of surveillance. My experience has been that as soon as everyone got established girlfriends and boyfriends and started to get jobs, the pecking order sort of settled, and everyone went about their business and life. Therefore, there was/is less scrutiny from those around us. I'm sure there may be some minor exceptions to the rule, but they would be exceedingly rare. To myself, at any My question to anyone who says that people are probably looking at me and thinking negative things would be to ask why anyone would care that much about you to put you that high as priority in their daily or even momentary life. Without fail, I never get a concrete or logical answer to this question. When I ask, I just receive a passive, I don't know. Let's try to come up with a legitimate way of judging whether other people are really paying that much attention to us in public. I will tell you the way I approach this with my clients who have this value and say this to themselves. I ask them to tell me right then and there in the session to remember and recount the last time they saw someone in Walmart that stood out to them negatively because of their appearance or body language. I have never had anyone immediately answer that they remembered anyone who stood out negatively from their last shopping experiences. Not even once. Here's why I think no one ever remembers anyone negatively. The difference between the terms WNL and ONL. Now you have no idea what those terms mean, most likely in that they are kind of a semi-therapeutic language. I'll explain how they apply to this question. WNL means within normal limits, and ONL means outside normal limits. They apply to this question in as so far, I believe that the only way anyone is going to notice someone at Walmart or out in general public is if they act in some way outside of normal limits and not within normal limits. I believe that it will take something substantially out of the norm for people to notice you negatively while walking through the frozen food aisle at your local supermarket. Likewise, something substantially out of the norm positively for them to notice you walking through the canned good aisles there as well. Now, if you put the Walmart question to me and ask me if I remember anyone over the last few years that I've gone to Walmart here in the city that I live in, the answer is yes, I can remember a few people that stood out. I can remember a woman in the checkout line in front of my wife and I who was dressed like she had just left her job at the strip club. She raised a horrendous fuss, seemingly steamed, and demanded to see a manager in charge to tell her that she was being stalked through the aisles by some man, and she demanded the manager to do something about it. I can also remember this one particular family that had a complete absence of social skills, and how they all four decided to jump on and commandeer the electric handicapped shopping carts and started racing around the store. What a complete bunch of morons. Yep, no problem remembering them either. On the flip side, maybe about a month ago, I remember seeing a mother and her kids walking through the store toward me in the center aisle, making eye contact with the last and youngest boy in line and giving him a subtle fist bump with the resulting explosion, and him smiling at me as he walked away. I was impressed with his social skills and how he picked up on what I was doing, and I remember him because he was a smart little guy. It was a fun exchange. I don't remember walking down the dairy aisle and thinking to myself at any point, gee, that's an ugly and weird little man right there, or, my lord, her hairstyle is absolutely abysmal. Somebody needs to get an intervention going. Of course not. I'm too busy trying to load my car and get the heck out of that place. I'm either preoccupied with trying to figure out what to put together for meals, or I'm getting frustrated because I can't find the breakfast enchiladas on aisle 5. True story, actually. I'm not there to people watch, nor is anyone else. People are shopping to get what they need and get the heck out of there and go home. Just like you are. My question to you would be whether others function on a different cognitive level than you do. What do you even remember? What do you notice and remember when you go out on a random errand? Why would others not feel and cognitively process these social encounters like you? Who would notice you? If you wouldn't, why would they? So either you would be saying that you lack the ability to put others naturally under the intense scrutiny, or you're saying there's something about yourself that merits other people putting you under an excessive level of surveillance. That something would have to be really outside of normal limits of appearance or behavior too. That really justifies others taking the time and effort to notice you negatively as well. Otherwise, what I'm saying is that you have an illogical belief that there is something negative about yourself that is unqualifiable and indescribable that naturally causes irrational and unexplainable reactions in others that we can't come up with any real definition or description of. I believe that paranoia, especially in these kinds of lower levels, is at the lowest common denominator based on a belief that you are a main character in everyone else's movie playing in their heads, or even the main character in their immediate world, instead of being the generally insignificant minor walk-on character who is seen and maybe briefly acknowledged but quickly forgotten. Most would argue that they weren't being narcissistic in this belief that everyone is probably looking at me and thinking something negative, because they aren't trying to be normally self-centered and egocentric in any kind of normal understood way. I can understand that sentiment. The issue with our main character, though, is that Justin was unwittingly feeling that he was more important to others than he really was, even if he is believing he is more important in a sort of reverse narcissism way. This sort of inverted self-importance is exactly what we are talking about and challenging in this chapter. My argument would be that narcissism is not only a positive inflation of self, but also can be a negative inflation of self-importance as well. It's any exaggerated sense of self-importance in the eyes of others. If you're the reincarnation of Elvis, then people would notice you, but not a regular person like Justin. The solution and the cognitive behavioral correction to this belief is to learn to see yourself through others' perspective lenses, the way you would see them, and accept that your movie camera functions the same way that other cameras do. The therapist had his hands full with Justin's social anxiety and belief that he had drawn negative attention on a deep level in casual and fleeting public interactions. Justin had used this belief that people are looking at me and thinking something negative about me to justify a truly negative sense of self-esteem, and then use that to justify his belief that people would then have a reason to look at him negatively. This circular merry-go-round logic was a hard cycle to break through for both Justin and his therapist. To his credit, Justin stayed the course and kept plugging away for many months before he started to gain traction. His therapist continued to place emphasis on Justin's own perceptions of others when he had fleeting social interactions as normal for how we will all approach these encounters, and place subtle validation for his way of assessing others as normal at the very least. Slowly, Justin came to believe that others saw him in the same way he saw them in these casual encounters. He started placing weight on the fact that he almost never noticed others unless they did something that basically screamed for attention or was far out of the norm that he couldn't help himself. While he maintained monthly sessions for the long term, Justin replaced his belief that people are probably looking at me and thinking something negative with people are probably noticing me about the same level I noticed them. And this reduced his anxiety and subsequent depressive symptoms and self-esteem issues a fair bit over time.